May I please request Abira Ishfaq to come over the stage?
I wrote a paper which is in your publication, and so you can read it, and it has a lot of legalese which I don't think would be very useful for today, but maybe I can just introduce the paper and the ideas behind it. Just a little bit of background about myself. I'm a law professor, and I've taught for 12 years in Karachi, and I'm teaching at IBA right now, and I teach feminism and the law right now, which has been very exciting for my female students to learn about law from a feminist perspective and to really understand how law is a province of men. So here we're talking about institutions and how institutions and courts and the bureaucracy and police stations need to be staffed. But in feminism and the law, we are really critiquing how the law itself is written for men, upper class men, propertied men. But having said that, I'm just going to segue into the paper that I wrote, which kind of was a culmination of my work with an NGO called Roshni Helpline in Karachi that traces missing children. And for years, Roshni Helpline had been working with police officers to point out a big lacuna in the law and also in police practice more than in the substantive law. And the problem was that when a parent went to report a missing child, police officers जो थे वो FIR दर्ज नहीं करते थे और ये तजवीज़ देते थे कि your child is probably just upset and has run away from home and will be back. And as a result of which, a lot of children would be abducted, kidnapped and transported, trafficked outside of the city, and it would be too late to actually retrieve them. So the investigation process was not triggered unless and until many days had elapsed. And so this led to a lot of advocacy with Parliament around a law called ZARRA, which is basically based on the tragic case of Zainab from Qasur, who unfortunately had to suffer a very traumatic event. And the predominant feature of this law is its definition of a missing child. And so missing child ki definition, and as I've sort of elaborated in my paper, has been broadened to include any child whose whereabouts are unknown to the parents. And so it does not matter whether 5 minutes has elapsed. अगर बच्चा या बच्ची हस्बे मामूल अपनी जगह पे स्कूल पे घर पे मौजूद नहीं हैं और 5 मिनट हुए हैं, तब भी पुलिस अफसरान का ये फ़र्ज़ बनता है कि वो फौरी तौर पर कानून को हरकत में लाएं और FIR दर्ज करें. And so the ZARRA law is not just about improving police practice and taking it out of the Roznamcha, where it basically gets ignored and missing children's cases are not investigated, but to actually bring it within the proper FIR system and the criminal justice system. So my paper really, as I'm just giving an intro, I just want to make sure that it's accessible to everybody when you read it. So one of the other things that I pointed out in this paper is about legal problems in our child protection laws. So the ZARRA law, which traces missing children, also relies on the Pakistan Penal Code. Or Pakistan Penal Code, hamara, for those of you who are law students, is obviously an archaic law which we inherited from our colonials. And even though many amendments, positive amendments have been made in it, it's still very sort of punishment focused. And one of the things that we talk about in our feminism and the law class is, inspiration from black feminists from the US, Angela Davis, who's really is leading the prison abolition project, right? Our focus should not be so much on convictions and jail times and enhanced penalties, but should really be in improving our systems, improving the law, improving how we think about elements in the law, and also improving social justice, educational programs. But coming back to the law, just like rape law requires a lot more on not just punishment, right, and how somebody is going to get sazae maut ya umar kaid ya castration. It should really be focused on substantive provisions on what is consent, right? And young people, law students especially like you, I think are the best positioned to talk about consent and really improve section 375 and 376 on rape and include more non-exhaustive list perhaps of what consent is or is not. Which brought me to the paper where I talk about mens rea, which a lot of law students know is the mental fault element in crimes, and actus reus. A lot of the provisions around abduction and child abduction, pornography are silent on the mens rea requirement, which is how we need to build discourse that these are strict liability offenses. It doesn't matter if you've committed an offense with a child, whether it's pornography, whether it's trafficking, whether it's abduction, your state of mind is irrelevant. The child's consent is irrelevant because the child is not capable of giving informed consent to such an activity, right? And so we need to build discourse and talk about what strict liability offenses are and why we have them in the law. अच्छा, दूसरी चीज़ जो मैंने नोटिस की इस पाकिस्तान ने एक बैनुल-अक़वामी कन्वेंशन साइन की है 1990 की चाइल्ड राइट्स कन्वेंशन, and because of ours being ratified that convention, we've improved our laws and we do officially recognize the universal age of childhood to be 18, under 18. But then when we look at the abduction provisions or the trafficking provisions in our law, they have all kinds of disparate ages, right? So there are some provisions, अगर मैं 364B, 361, 366, मैं अब इतने ज़्यादा provisions को mention नहीं करूँगी, it's all in my article, लेकिन किसी के अंदर सिर्फ बच्चियों को protection दी गई है और लड़कों को नहीं. कुछ provisions के अंदर लड़कियों की उम्र of protection to procure a girl for sexual favors 16 दी गई है, लेकिन बच्चों की protection लड़कों की जो है वो सिर्फ 14 है. कोई किडनैपिंग के प्रोविज़न है जिसके अंदर it only applies to children under the age of 10, right? So the question as a lawyer and as a researcher to my mind was that where is this coming from? Why do we have disparate age protections in all these statutes, right? Especially statutes pertaining to abduction and kidnapping. Is this based on data that Roshni Helpline is produced from Karachi? Is this based on data that other organizations working on child rights in Islamabad or wherever, whichever city you're from? And if it's not, then it's obviously something that we've just held on to from our colonial past, right? And there is obviously, the impetus or to protect younger children, because people generally believe that younger children under the age of 10, 14 are more susceptible, more vulnerable to crimes of violence such as trafficking or kidnapping. Maybe girls are more, but that's not what the data says, right? So if we look at the numbers given by Sahil NGO or Roshni Helpline, boys are equally vulnerable. Girls and boys have different kinds of vulnerabilities, right? I mean, younger children can be used for begging. Boys who are aged 12 upwards can be used for child labor. A lot of girls who are between the ages of 10 and 14 can be used for sex work. So the more we make our law alive to actual risks and problems faced by children who are abducted, we're not going to make it that rigorous. And I know I'm running out of time. Do I have more time or?
You can finish.
Okay, I'm just going to make one more comment then. So the last comment I want to make is about child labor laws. So in my paper, I have tied together not just criminal justice laws, ZARRA laws, and protecting children against crime, but also labor laws. Now we have since 2010 25A in our constitution that guarantees free compulsory education for all children between the ages of 5 and 16. But we have a contradiction in labor law, because even in forget the Factories Act of 1934, right? Colonial era ka purana, needs a lot of amendments, बहुत ही एक अजीब सी mentality में अभी तक function कर रहा है. But even the 1991 law allows children under the ages, above the ages of 14 to 16 to work 7 hours in a factory. And so what we need to think about is, when your constitution is guaranteeing a fundamental right to education for all children between 5 and 16, how do you expect this employment of child a law to be compatible with that requirement? If children are working 7 days, right, and also need time for leisure, study, how are they going to exercise their, okay.
Thank you, Abira,
Okay,
for
I'm sorry.
enlightening us with your valuable insight.